Well, I firmly believe you can, and you can be a better leader when you can look at the people that you lead and you can call them friend.
Hmm.
Because, Sean, I know this. You want what's best for your friends, right? I want what's best for
Yeah.
my friends.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast. This is the podcast where you hear the real stories of people just like you who have become extraordinary leaders. You'll learn valuable tips from their lives that you can apply to become the best leader that you were created to be. When leaders are intentional, lives are changed. I'm your host, Sean Olson. I am a business owner, speaker, author, and obviously podcast host. Thank you for tuning in today. And listeners, as we get going today, please hit that subscribe button, the like button, leave comments, help us on all the different platforms to get the message out of how intentional leaders change lives as we go. Today, listeners, you're in for a special treat. My guest is Brian Ahearn. Brian is one of only a dozen people in the world who is a Cialdini-certified trainer. And for those of you going, what in the world is that? You will find out today what that is. But beyond that, I'm glad to have Brian on here because Brian and I are also very good personal friends. We live in the same metro area. And we may be known for meeting up for cigars and bourbon. I don't know. That's where great business is done and great relationships build. Brian, welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast.
Sean, it's great to see you. I appreciate you having me on. And even as good as this is, I look forward to the next time we have that cigar and bourbon.
Exactly. We got to get that book soon and get inside to enjoy it with all this weather we have going on.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, I know you bring a lot to the table that our listeners are going to love about intentional leadership from your angle around the realm of influence. We always begin by having the guests kind of share some of their professional journey. So you've gone from insurance to influence. Talk about that start in your professional career.
Sure. I took a job in the insurance industry, had no idea I would get into that, but took it because I was dating a girl. I spent most of my life here in Columbus, Ohio. And then, as fate would have it, the very first day of work, I met my wife, Jane. She started her first day at the Travelers. And that's the best part of the career for sure. But the thing I learned was insurance was a great career to be a part of. And
Mm-hmm.
so I stayed within the insurance industry until 2018 when I decided to leave. And I had started Influence People on the side, and I determined it was time to make a run at it as a full time. And I haven't looked back. It's been awesome. I've traveled the country and traveled the world to speak to clients and written several books. And it's just been incredible.
That's awesome. So let's go to the insurance time for a little bit because I was like, quite a while you had there. Give us like your top two leadership lessons learned in that realm of insurance and working with people and selling. What were your top two leadership lessons?
Well, I was very fortunate to work for the same leader for, I think it was about 18 years or so. And that might seem inconceivable to some people, but
Mm-hmm.
one of the things I learned from John, he was able to, he's a great friend and still is. And I get together with him at least quarterly to catch up and exchange ideas.
Nice.
But he was able to wear that leader hat where sometimes he'd say, okay, Brian, I'm going to speak to you as a friend. And here's what I would tell you. But now I'm putting on my corporate hat and this
Mm.
is what I'm going to tell you. And to be able to do that, some people can't work for people or lead people that they're friends with. It gets kind of weird. John was able to do that amazingly. The other thing that I felt was really great about John as a leader, his expectations were so clear that all you
Mm.
needed to do was conform to what those expectations were in terms of timing and how you're going to manage projects and things like that. And you knew like every 2 weeks, John was going to be reaching out to you for a touch base. And so the day before that, I would always reach to him first. And he
Right.
appreciated that because it said to him, you understand how I lead and you're getting in line with that in the way that I think is best to help the company. So those would be the two things. It would be understanding how to straddle that line of the corporate, but also the friendship, because I think the friendship
Mm-hmm.
part's super important, but then also with the clear expectations.
Yeah, I love that. So let's talk about the corporate and the friend piece for a minute because I know a lot of people say you can't mix business and pleasure, the business and the personal. Yet at the same time, when we develop a solid relationship with our work colleagues,
Mhm.
it opens up doors to richer conversations, which drives business. And it is very difficult. So I want you to address this from two sides. One is break down the myth that you can't be friends with people that you lead. And then the second side of it is kind of like, what are some key tools to navigate that effectively?
Yep. Well, I firmly believe you can, and you can be a better leader when you can look at the people that you lead and you can call them friend.
Hmm.
Because, Sean, I know this. You want what's best for your friends, right? I want what's best for my
Yeah.
friends. And when the people that you lead know that you want the best for them because you see them as more than just a cog, in the production line, so to speak, that changes everything. Because even if I put something on the table that you might not think is the best idea, or maybe it's not the right idea for the challenge
Hmm.
that you have, you still know it's coming from a place where I deeply care. And the more that we get to know each other, the more I probably am putting on the table ideas that do align with who you are because I'm coming to know you as a person. So I think one of the best things that you get out of business are the relationships with the people that you lead,
Hmm.
that you work with outside of your leadership, maybe your customers,
Yeah.
vendors, and all of those people.
I agree with you totally. And, we run into situations where people want leadership positions because of power, prestige, revenue, the raise that comes with it. And we've told people straight up in our coaching, Brian, we've told them that if you don't care for people, you will
Mhm.
never be an effective leader.
Yep.
There has to be that human element of care to really drive them and to bring the best out of them.
Yeah. So if I were your leader and you knew that I genuinely cared about you, I'd taken an interest, I knew what your goals were, your family, all those kinds of things that really speak to friendship, don't you think you'd want to work a lot harder for me? Because you
Right.
are viewing me as friend too, and you want to give your best to those that you consider friends. And so we've got this virtuous cycle going where I am putting forth and caring for you, and you reciprocate, and we end up accomplishing a lot more because of it.
Absolutely, we do. So, when you transition out of insurance, you began to really tap into people, this concept of influence.
Mhm.
And with all of your writings, your four books, and just knowing you, influence is kind of like the driving word in your career at this point. Talk about how that concept came in your mind through insurance, why you transitioned, and maybe even how you would define the difference between influence versus other realms of leadership.
Okay. Well, at any point, too, feel free to jump in with a question. But
Oh,
I
I
will tell
will.
you that the influence started when I came across the work of Dr. Robert Cialdini. A coworker gave me a
Hmm.
video, and as I watched it, and he talked about influence, the light bulb came on. My first thought was, this explains all of selling. The principles of persuasion he talked about explained why certain selling approaches worked and why certain ones didn't. And I was involved in sales training. So that meant a lot. Second thing was it was all research based. This wasn't motivational hype. Here was the data. It was clear the difference it can make when you incorporate this. So I felt super confident to get behind it. And then third, I appreciated his stance on ethics. He was very clear
Hmm.
about doing it in non-manipulative ways. Through a series of events, I came in contact with Cialdini, and ultimately he was a guest speaker at my company, my former company, State Auto Insurance, in the summer of 2004. And it was at that point that I started to pursue getting the Cialdini Method Certified Trainer designation. And once I had that, I could see that there was an opportunity for me to do things outside the four walls at the organization. So I
Hmm.
started influence people, and I started speaking and training and blogging and doing all these things to slowly build this business because I knew it's what I would leave the company someday and do full time. And I made that leap in 2018. Um, with regard to influence, when I was involved in the sales training, well, it infused everything that we did.
Yep.
Whatever we would ask people to do, here's the psychology, and this is why. When I became the head of the corporate university, well, it infused everything I did as a leader. So influence isn't just about influencing in a sale to get a yes. It's something that we do 24/7 through the entirety of our lives.
Hmm. Absolutely. And if our heart is in the wrong place, that's where it leads to manipulation, or if we make it
Mhm.
just about the yes, it becomes transactional and not relational. which by definition isn't influence.
Yeah. I was glad that I didn't encounter Cialdini's work when I was in college because I wouldn't have been mature enough
Hmm.
to utilize it in the way that he intended, which was to create win-win outcomes for people. So the way it all worked out was great. I mean, I was steeped in my faith by the time I had come across his work. And so the fact that he talked about non-manipulative ways that we can do this ethically, that meant a lot to me because it wasn't just about making the sale. It was about building a relationship so that it wasn't just one sale in the insurance industry, it would be years of sales. And the company was
Mhm.
very successful at doing that as we incorporated Cialdini's work.
Awesome. So I know of late you've become quite the prolific author. Your previous book versus the one that just came out was called The Influencer. I know in there you referenced Cialdini. It's I guess really more in the fable form, but yet there's a lot of truth laced through it as far as the characters in your life. But you talk in there about the different principles of influence. Why don't you just quickly tell us what those principles are, and maybe we'll dive into one or two of them.
Okay. So Cialdini has 7 what he calls principles of influence or principles of persuasion. The first one that we talk about is liking. Basically says it's easier for you to say yes to me if you know me and like me. Everybody gets that one.
Hmm.
Yet most people go about it wrong. And we could talk about that later if that's what intrigues you. The next is reciprocity, that sense of obligation we have to give back to people who first give to us. And then
Hmm.
there's what we call the principle of unity. And unity is about shared identity. That if you and I share an identity, or the example I use quite often, my father served in the United States Marine Corps. My dad would have done anything for another Marine, even his closest friends and maybe some of his blood relatives, because that special bond that existed. So
Yeah.
when you have unity, it goes way deeper than mere liking. Those 3 principles are especially good when you are looking to build or strengthen a relationship. And so this is kind of an arc for leadership, right? Build
Hmm.
relationships, move people beyond uncertainty, and get them to take action. So Cialdini's work lines up beautifully with that. So to move people beyond uncertainty, there's a couple of principles that we tap into. One is authority. It's easier for us to follow the lead of an expert. And the
Yep.
second one is social proof. What are other people doing? Human beings, we are wired to have connection with other people. So how they're thinking, feeling, and behaving will impact how we think, feel, and behave. And so as an influencer, you want to bring that into your communication. And then finally, there's 2 more principles that are good for motivating people to take action because they may like you, they may not be
Hmm.
unsure about what to do, but they're dragging their feet. And so we
Hmm.
talk about the principle of consistency, that we feel an internal psychological pressure, but also an external social pressure to be consistent in what we say and do. It basically boils down to word and deed. We feel better about
Yeah.
ourselves when we live up to our word. And the final principle is called scarcity. We are more motivated by things that we think we will lose versus those things we think we will gain. So that's the 7 principles and kind of an overarching framework in terms of how you might apply them.
I like that. It's in both the books, the last 2 books that I've read of yours, that comes through, and you address those different principles as they're happening in real time. You mentioned at the very beginning that likability is one that is misunderstood by many people. And I know that a lot of people feel like if you like me, everything's going to be fine. But like is such a broad term and definition. So give us kind of the 2 sides of that coin of likability, when it's done well and when it's not done well.
When it's not done well is when somebody just hears that definition, right? It's easier for you, Sean, to say yes to me if you know me and like me. And so then people do everything they can to get people to like them. And they almost come across like a used car salesman. I will say or do
Hmm.
anything to connect with you just to get you to do what I want. That's the wrong way. The right way is to go into situations and say, I want to get to know and like the people that I work with. So
Hmm.
I can use the same approach. For example, I can connect on what we have in common, right? We like cigars and we like bourbon. Boom, we
Right.
can start right there and we can find a multitude of other things. And the more things we find in common, we tend to like people that we see as similar to ourselves. Or if I pay you a genuine compliment and you feel good, the endorphins are flowing and you tend to like me more. But Sean, the key is that when I do that, when I find out you like bourbon and cigars, I start liking you more. And when I find
Mhm.
things that are praiseworthy and I share that with you, I'm convincing myself what a good guy you are. And that's the difference, right? Because that's what starts making me like you. And with all of your sight, sound, all the things that are coming your way, you can tell when people really like you. And when you
You
have
can.
that sense that Brian likes me, that's what opens you up to whatever I might be asking or sharing.
I appreciate that. We can not only tell when someone genuinely likes you, it's actually easier to even tell when they are being fake about it,
Yeah.
right? It's kind of the Eddie Haskell effect. If you go back way back in time to television and stuff with Eddie
Yeah.
Haskell on Leave It to Beaver, likability is a big piece. One of the other ones you mentioned in there that I think people maybe don't think about very often, and I'm even viewing it from the sales side, we have to work through objections.
Mhm.
And that's kind of that third tier. So dive into those last two for a minute, because when we are developing relationships, we're influencing people, we want them to come to that point of yes.
Mhm.
For a lot of people, when we get the objections and the questions, we just shut down
Right.
and we don't really know where to go from there. And that's those last two principles. So that's help us understand those last two principles of getting to yes.
Well, to move beyond that state of uncertainty is really dealing with objection. And so I take you back and talk about authority and social proof to
Mm-hmm.
try to give you the confidence that what I'm sharing with you is actually a good idea in your best interest, right? And so if I
Yep.
bring expertise in, maybe it's outside experts or data or things like that, that starts shaping how you think about things. When you start to realize that other customers, particularly those who are similar to you, are benefiting from that. That also starts weighing on you and moving you out of that uncertainty, you're moving away from the objections. The last two principles are very good at when I talk with salespeople at closing the sale. That's the action we want them
Yep.
to take. And utilizing a principle like consistency. If I have done my work well at the beginning and I've asked the right questions, then it starts to become natural for you to want to stay in line with what you've already said you believe, you value, you're looking for, all of those things. It just makes it, instead of closing, it's really informing you into yes. Or if I use the principle of scarcity, I'm not trying to scare you into something, but because
Right.
I've come to know and like you, I genuinely don't want you to miss this opportunity, which might not be available at some time in the future. So it moves some of these away from like kind of twisting your arm. Hey, Sean, you said this,
Mm-hmm.
or making you feel like you're having this pressure put on, like if you don't sign today, I can't give you this tomorrow, kind of thing. We've all experienced that, and we hate it. So it's just a
Mm-hmm.
different way of communicating that's more authentic. But it all started with because I want the best for you, because I've come to
Yep.
know you and like you.
Absolutely. And it is about that person, right? It's not
Mhm.
about the sale of a product or a service. It's about what we can do for that person and how it
Yep.
benefits them. And, we have a thought in our business that God gives us the clients he wants us to impact.
Mhm.
Those that are not open to us say no. And we're okay with that
Yep.
because it's impossible to reach everybody. You have to know the types of people you can influence and how that goes. So, let's dive into the books for a little bit. Your book of influencing people, you invited some characters into that book. It was all about influence. It was all about the Cialdini principles. But now you have your latest one that just came out called Influenced from Above. I love the story of why you wrote this one. Why don't you share that with our listeners?
Sure. So I had given a presentation here in town, and this was pre-COVID, and my daughter came. She hadn't seen me present for maybe a decade. So we went to lunch the next day, and I was really curious about what she thought. We talked about the presentation, but then she asked the question that sparked the book. She said,
Mm-hmm.
Dad, what I want to know with this psychology, where is God in all this? Where do
Mm-hmm.
you see him fitting into all this stuff that you're doing? And just impromptu, we had this great conversation. And I just remember thinking that that's going to be the basis for a book. And so when the book called The Influencer, when that book ended and the lead character's in his early 50s and he's left his corporate role, I thought this is perfect. What now for him, right? And you've probably worked with so many leaders who, once they step away, what now? What do I do?
Yeah.
And so he's searching for purpose, and he gets involved with his church in a building a community center, and he
Mm-hmm.
starts to realize that what made me successful at work might not be so successful here with the congregation. but what motivates the congregation may not be motivating people outside in the secular world. And he starts to look at how Cialdini's principles actually have biblical roots. And then
Yep.
it plays out in a story format.
Nothing new under the sun, right?
Yep.
God laid
Except
it
I,
out in Scripture.
except I think the way we take things and make something new, this was really gratifying. When I shared the first draft of the book with Dr. Cialdini, he came back and said it was completely unique. He'd never seen anything like it. And so I
Mm-hmm.
knew I had hit something there, because while everybody does talk about influence, and there's a lot of talk about obviously biblical things, nobody had taken those two concepts and brought them together. And so I feel like it's something really unique that I had an opportunity to put out into the world.
I would agree. So I want to kind of take a tangential view here for a second. You and I both have faith as a major driver in our life. Listeners, you may or may not have faith as a driver in your life, and that is fine. You have to be where you are, and there's no judgment or things like that in those realms. But talk a little bit about your journey, Brian, in saying, am I at a place to bring faith into what I actually do professionally? And taking this step, because people I know that have heard you speak can sense it, they can see it, they can feel it. But with this new book, Influence from Above, I mean, you just say, here's where it is. Here's where I am. Here's where it is. Talk about that jump into being open to being out there with your faith.
Uh, all of that really started with the ethical part. Because of my faith, the ethics of this meant a lot. And so I really would hit on that heavily when I would talk with audiences. But in more recent years, as I look at, for example, social media, and I think about
Mhm.
my career, when I started my career right out of Miami University, 1986, with the Travelers Insurance Companies, the world was so different.
Yeah.
And one of the things was there was certain topics that were taboo in the workplace, and you didn't talk about them. And even outside of the workplace, you didn't really talk about them in front of maybe your boss and things. That's totally changed, right? Because of social justice and all kinds of things. And so I thought, you know what? It's time for me to be more forthright too. Uh, some people will still be turned off by it. That's okay.
Mhm.
But I feel like at this point in my career, this is kind of the icing on the cake. I've had an opportunity to bring something I've been passionate about, and that is helping people uh, positively and ethically influence people. But now I can bring the faith component into it and show people how it comes together. And the way it's playing out for me, Sean, is this: that my company name is Influence People, and People is an
Mhm.
acronym. Powerful, everyday opportunities to persuade that are lasting and ethical. But now
Hmm.
what I'm talking about is the powerful everyday opportunities to persuade that are loving and eternal. Because if I am loving people, then I don't have to worry about the ethics, right? You and I,
Right.
being people of faith, we know that once you lay the rules out, everybody says, how close can I get? Or how far can I go beyond and still be
Yep.
okay? But if we are looking to love God and love neighbor, then it takes care of itself. And then the other part is, yes, we have businesses to run so that we can pay our bills and feed our family and do all those
Yep.
things. But ultimately, it's all about eternity. I mean, we are already in eternity. So
Mhm.
I look at it that I want to have an impact on people for eternity. And if I can build those kinds of relationships with people, if I can do that with integrity, who knows what doors it may open to say, Brian, tell me more about the things that you believe, and have that opportunity to have the eternal impact. And my platform is Influence People. Yours is your organization. And so
Yep.
that's really how things have changed for me.
Good. Good. That's powerful. And it's been a fun journey for us, for me personally, for my wife and I, and then leading the business together. Uh, our faith drives what we do, right? We even use a phrase, God owns the business, he lets us run it.
Mhm.
And that's our view of it. And we are given the people that God wants us to impact in a positive way. And I like how you brought all that together. I really appreciate Influence from Above, where it is about that church and the community center, but it's involving the community, and it's taking those principles to realize it applies to every facet of our life. It even applies to our families, influencing our family and
Absolutely.
helping them understand how much we truly care about them. So, talk for a minute about how your family, obviously, your daughter was the one that kind of gave you that question that pushed you towards this latest book, but How have you seen these principles of influence carry out in your nuclear family?
Okay. Um, I will start by saying about a year and a half ago, it was May 2024. I had an opportunity to speak at a conference called Influence Amplified. It was a celebration of Cialdini's 40th anniversary of his book, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion. So he's in the front row, and I'm the first keynote speaker after he and his partner, Dr. Neidert, had talked. And I stood there, Sean, and I said, before I start, I have to thank you, Dr. Cialdini, because not only did you change the course of my career, because this is what I do now, but I said, you changed the course of my life. And I got really emotional because he's sitting right there.
Yeah.
But it goes to, I said, it impacts outside of what I do at work, it impacts every relationship that I have. And I said, in terms of, my wife and our daughter and how we raised her and the things that we talk about. So the impact I see on our family, especially, Jane very early on grasped these principles, and she would ask me how to apply them in the things that she was doing. But she was really good at teaching Abigail. So, an example,
Mm.
maybe I would do something kind, and Jane would say, Abigail, that was really nice what Dad did. What can we do for Dad? So, she's learning
Mm.
reciprocity, right? That only made me want to do more good things.
Right.
And all of these principles would come to bear in terms of trying to raise her and influence her in a direction that I thought would be really good and healthy for her. And, by the grace of God, about a year ago, we were sitting out on our front porch and our daughter was over and she's looking at the neighborhood. This is the only house she's ever lived in. And she
Mm.
thanked us. And she just said,
Mm.
I've had a wonderful life. You guys did a great job raising me and this home. And she said, I wouldn't change a thing. So that meant a lot.
Wow. Yeah. That makes any dad teary
Yeah.
that's had those kids. And that's where we want to bring it around to. I appreciate that. It impacts all of life. And that's like one of the taglines that we use all the time here, and the tagline in this podcast, that when leaders are intentional, lives are changed.
Mhm.
Leadership is not about sales. It's not about processes and hitting the bottom line. That's a part of leadership. But we manage processes, we lead people.
Yeah.
It's an honor and a privilege to be able to have the opportunity to impact people beyond the job and impact them with where they're going.
Can I share one personal story, one family story that the
Please.
intentionality? Um, we only had one child, a daughter,
Mhm.
and you raise a daughter, and the world can be scary.
Yeah.
And I taught Abigail to say no early on. She was 12 years old, in the early
Mhm.
teens. We were at Taekwondo one day, and the master of the school comes over, and I forget, Abigail's probably 15 or something like that. And he said, hey, Abigail, there's a tournament on Saturday. I want you to compete. And she said, I really don't want to, Master Black. And they kind of had a little back and forth. And he said, we'll talk about it after class. So she turns to me and she says, Dad, can't we say we're just busy? And I said, no, we're not going to lie. If you don't want to compete, you have to look him in the eye and tell him no. So
Mhm.
after class, we go outside, and his reasons were great. And if she would have competed, she would have benefited. But the lesson that she learned was, I can say no to somebody, even in a position of authority, because I have confidence, because my dad has given me that confidence. And
Mhm.
I think women being able to say no can save them from a lot of heartache throughout life. And I'm so proud of the strong will that she has in being able to do that. But it was intentional. We don't just
Mhm.
leave it to chance. We say, this is a skill and I want her to have it. How can I help instill it?
Absolutely. Fantastic story. And as a dad of an only daughter who's now 21 and getting ready to get married, I know you're a few steps ahead of that one. It's just incredible to see where she is, because my wife and I have been intentional every single step of the way and how we're leading her and guiding her. And so, weaving that back to the book for a second, and influence in the latest book, when it talks about John, the main character, encountering different scenarios, the community center, he is recalling some of these 7 principles of influence,
Mhm.
which means he's being intentional about it, right? Here's my situation. What tools do I have to deal with this situation that I can pull out at this time and make them effective? But what I like about that is that these 7 principles of influence are just like any other muscle. The more we use those muscles, we develop muscle memory, and it becomes
Right.
almost second nature of when to use those principles at different places.
Mhm.
But I want to bring that back to the beginning for a second for our listeners, because I'm sure a lot of our listeners right now are saying, I don't even know if I have influence. I've just heard those principles and stuff. So for the listener who's saying, how do I even assess myself at where I am and what are my first steps? What would you say to them?
I say the first step is to begin to learn these principles, because I often use the example of a new car. I'll ask audience members how many bought a new car in the last year or two, and hands go up. And I said, if you're like me, did you experience this? The day I drove my new car off the lot, I saw it everywhere. I mean,
Yep.
it's there, it is, there it is. And they all
Yep.
laugh and they all experience the same thing. And then I say, now let's be honest. Everybody didn't run out and buy that car, right? Something
Mhm.
changed. It was your focus or your perspective. You began to notice something that had been there all along. When you
Yep.
begin to learn these principles, even if it's just at the definition level, you begin to learn them. All of a sudden, you start going, oh, that's how the salesperson's trying to get me to buy. That's how the marketer is trying to get me to the store. That's how the politician's trying to get me to vote for him or her. So you begin to see how it's at play. But then you start seeing how you can put it into play so that it makes it easier for people to say yes to you. If you don't understand the language, you probably will not see your opportunities, whether those are coming at you or you're trying to put them into practice. So to me, that's the starting point.
I appreciate that. And it's understanding, seeing it. It was interesting when I read The Influencer, your previous one, and you're going through the story with John at that point, navigating his career and pulling those principles. For me, it was like adding definition to things that I was doing somewhat naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I say naturally, it could have been from God. It's obviously been from people in my life, some natural instincts, but it was nice to put definition behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And I even think to see the science behind it, right? To understand that influencing people is a science. And the reason I like it being called a science is it means it can be learned.
Right.
It's not just a nature thing, it is fully a nurture thing. You can learn those sciences, you can see the benefits of them. Because I think no matter what, even if it's whether it be professional or personal, it's developing better relationships. It's pulling the best out of yourself and pulling the best out of others so we can treasure life together.
Yeah, it is definitely a skill that can be taught and learned. Doesn't mean that everybody is going to be outstanding. All I look for when I'm working with a client is where are you now and can we get you better? And if you
Mhm.
see that improvement, and typically I'm working with salespeople, right? If they make a sale, they're like, holy cow, this is gold. Tell me more. And
Yeah.
so they naturally start wanting more. They start looking for more. And to your point about you recognize reading the book that you already were doing some of these things, they naturally were coming. Almost everybody has that reaction because they start hearing about the principles and they think, oh, that's how the salesman got me to buy the car or buy the home. Or they start recognizing, oh, maybe that's why people respond to me positively because I am the kind of person who likes to give without expectation, reciprocity.
Yep.
So people will recognize that they're doing what I want them to do, to use your word from earlier. I want them to be intentional. I want
Mhm.
them to recognize how they might be at play so that when they go into a communication of some sort, that they're thinking about which principles would apply here. How can I leverage these ethically so that it's easier for that person to see the merits as a leader of the direction I want to take the organization, as a salesperson, maybe to make that sale. That's where the rubber meets the road. It's not enough that we know it. Example, we all know how we could live a more healthy life, and yet most people don't do it, right? So wisdom's
Correct.
the application of knowledge.
Absolutely. Let's begin to bring this home for a little bit. If listeners are a part of an organization, especially a selling organization, and they're thinking, hey, we'd like to hear more about this, what are the types of workshops that you do through your company, Influence People?
So I do keynotes, half day, full day, and if they want 2 day workshops where we and what ends up happening there is we just go deeper and deeper into these principles and the more
Mhm.
time we have, the more activity that we can bring into it. But everything focuses on these principles and giving people a framework for how to put that into play. And so I mentioned earlier about relationships, overcoming uncertainty and motivating action. When I'm working with salespeople, we look at the sales cycle, starting with prospecting all the way through referrals. What's the best psychology? Why? What are examples, etc. So there's a number of different frameworks that we can use, but the baseline is always understanding deeply these 7 principles.
I appreciate that. And I appreciate it very much because I know a lot of sales trainings, sales workshops are 90% sis boom ba rah rah rah.
Mhm.
And just a little bit of content, you're really driving it that this is content to actually help you become something different.
Yes. And when we live by principles. And so
Right.
I don't like when people talk about tips, tricks, stuff like that.
Mhm.
Nobody wants to be tricked into saying
Right.
yes. But when you're dealing with somebody that you think has integrity, that they live by principles, you feel good about that. And
Mhm.
so I would want people to absorb these principles so deeply that they're not even almost thinking about them at some point. They're just who they are. And I've had people before say, like, I saw what you did there. And Sean, I would honestly think, I wonder what they're talking about. And then they would tell me, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I used a principle there, but it was so deeply ingrained. I wasn't
Right.
having to think about it forwardly. It's just who I am now.
It is. And, that brings up this whole argument. We don't have time to go into it right now. You mentioned earlier the difference between manipulation versus influence. And people could even think, okay, if I'm using these principles, am I not trying to manipulate them to go a certain direction? The big difference is it still goes back to the heart of it.
Mhm.
I've got to be genuine with it. And it starts with that first principle of likability. If I'm actually caring about that person and developing a relationship with that person, whether they ever spend a penny on my stuff, we both win no matter what.
Yeah. Manipulators are always out for themselves. If you win,
Mhm.
they're okay with it, as long as they still win. And if you don't win, but they win, they're still okay with it. What we are encouraging people to do is to try to create frameworks where both people leave the communication better off. I like to say it, and I put it in the book, The Influencer. Good for you, good for me, then we're good to go, right? If we both
Yeah,
leave that transaction feeling better off, then that's a win for both of us.
absolutely. Well, Brian, it's been great to have you on the show today. I want to finish with the question we always finish every show with. What is something our listeners can intentionally do today to be a more effective leader?
I think it would start with the mindset that says this: I want to like the people that I lead. And then from there, if you're genuine that you want to like them, you will start finding ways to build those relationships. But it starts with the intention of not just wanting them to perform, but wanting to like them.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Brian, thanks for being on the show today. Listeners, in the show notes, you'll find links to Brian's social and to his company, Influence People, and to his books. So please take advantage of that and pick those up. We didn't really even talk about the first 2 books, but all 4 of his books are in this realm of influence. And we'll even throw in the link for Cialdini's book that kind of drove all this from the very, very beginning. Brian, appreciate you. Appreciate the friendship. Thank you for being on the Intentional Leader podcast.
Hey, it was my pleasure, Sean, and I look forward to our next get together.
All right. God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Reenergize Professional Coaching. Be sure to see the show notes for links to Reenergize Professional Coaching and links to contact our guests. Now, hit that subscribe button so that you are alerted with every new episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast.